I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. Will, it was 20 to 20 in the fourth quarter, deep into the fourth quarter. DJ Lagway gets injured early on. Aiden Warner is helping carry the way, but more impressively, the defense is playing some ball. But let me read some of the final stats to you and see if this makes any sense here. Total yardage on the day for the Gators, 228 yards, 113 yards through the air, nine completions on 30 attempts. Will, the Gators had 38 rushing attempts, 115 yards. Not exactly lighting it up, Will. And meanwhile, you are giving up 455 total yards to Georgia. Carson Beck, three interceptions. The defense had its moments, and they definitely had their times where they stepped up and made some big plays, and they put the offense in position to capitalize uh, more than they did with those opportunities. However, despite the discrepancies on the stat sheet, we're sitting there at 20 to 20 late in the fourth quarter with two teams that probably shouldn't have been that close. Will, what happened and how did we get there?
How did we get to 20 to 20, or how did it end up how did it end up losing by two touchdowns?
We'll
I mean,
get to
look,
that part next. I'm setting you up for this part first.
it was the interceptions, right? I mean, so Beck was moving the Georgia offense. Like Florida's defense was not locked down in this one. And I think people who sit there and go, "Oh, the defense played great." The defense was very opportunistic. The defense was able to make Beck look bad. The defense was able to make a play when they needed to make a play a bunch of different times. And then when it came down to it, when it was 20 to 20, they weren't able to. And that's sort of in my mind, the story of the game from the defensive side of the ball. If you look overall, you mentioned 455 yards, but also 6.2 yards per play for the entire game. And it wasn't like it was like, oh, they shut him down in the first half and then ran out of gas. I mean, they gave up 6 yards per play in the first quarter, 4.6 in the second, 9.3 in the third, 5.9 in the fourth. So the defense was very opportunistic. They did some really unique things, rushing the linebackers off of Desmond Watson. So Desmond Watson was occupying two guys. They had him split out at defensive end to start the game. And I was like, whoa, what's he doing out there? Like that's a bye week adjustment that they've made, putting him out there. But what they decided to do was they decided that having Desmond Watson out there on pass rush downs made sense because he could occupy two blockers and it was freeing up the linebackers. The defense was a lot more aggressive in this one. If you go and look at the actual statistics, I don't have them in front of me, but if you look at the blitzing statistics, Florida blitzed a lot more in this one, a lot more simulated pressures, a lot more linebackers coming. And, the two big sacks, the Pup Howard, wasn't really a sack, but Pup Howard hitting Beck, causing the interception to Jack Pyburn, and then Miles Graham got a big sack there in the either late third or early fourth quarter to get the ball turned back over to Florida. Um, so look, the defense did its job, but I think the defense also kind of established what it is, which is kind of middle of the road FBS defense. But that's actually really good compared to what Florida's been the last 3 or 4 years, really 5 or 6 years on defense. And so, you know, they get off the field from time to time. They make some plays, but they also give up some big plays against better opponents. And Georgia is a better opponent than some of the other folks that Florida's played. But to your point, I mean, look, Beck was terrible in this one. His QB rating was below 130, throws three interceptions. He made a couple big plays at the end when he needed to. But if Lagway played this entire game, it's a very different game because Florida's going for the jugular on that interception to Pyburn, and they didn't even take a shot, right? In fact, they just ran a poorly blocked read option with Aiden Warner on 3rd and 2, got stuffed, and then had to punt after that interception. They run completely different play calls in that space. And so what really happened was Warner's inefficiency on offense allowed Carson Beck to slow things down. So I will say that what I think the defense did in the first half is they sped up Carson Beck. Like Beck was letting the ball go before he needed to, before he was getting hit, and then eventually, once he threw a couple interceptions, he stopped letting the ball go because he was afraid he was going to throw an interception. He was seeing some ghosts out there. Warner struggling on the Florida side meant that Beck had more margin for error, and you could kind of see him slow down. And as he slowed down a little bit, then all of a sudden the big throws came without the turnovers. They were able to punch a couple in, and that's all she wrote.
Yeah, Florida defense first half sets up two Two quick scores. They got a touchdown on the first one on a 43-yard touchdown pass from Lagway to Aiden Mizell. Mizell's just wide open. Lagway hits it in stride. The deep ball puts the Gators up early, 7-3. Another interception, and Florida has to settle for a field goal this time. But Will, at the end of the first half, we saw something that we don't usually see. We saw Florida actually execute, get down the field. Although they did run the ball, they just had a couple nice big runs. Jacoby Jackson, I thought, ran very hard this game. He ran hard throughout. Ends up putting up that touchdown in the fourth quarter to tie it up 2020. What do we think about the running game?
I mean, I think it's limited but effective at times. I mean, you mentioned, 38 rushes for 115 yards in the game. That's 3 yards per carry. Now, that does factor in sacks, and it also factors in the 31-yard loss on the field goal attempt. So if you say, okay, well, it's 37 rushes for 146 yards, which is what it would be if you added the 31 yards there and took away that rush. Well, now you're looking at 4 yards per rush, and you're looking at a little bit more effective a little bit more effective running game. I thought Florida had some stuff working when it came to the running game. In fact, that's one of the things we talked about last week on Stand Up and Holler was that this is not the same Georgia defense against on the ground or against the running game as it has been for the last 3 or 4 years. And certainly that remained true in this one. Florida pushed them around a little bit at times. The fact that they couldn't shut down Florida's offense completely in the second half with as poor as Warner played is indicative of that, right? That they were able to pop a couple of runs, they were able to get to the outside a couple of times, specifically on the touchdown run. Like I think you can see what Florida's building. The problem is by the time you get down to your third quarterback, you're so limited in terms of what you can do through the air that now the defense can start to crowd the line of scrimmage. And what you don't want to do is kind of the Billy Napier special. You throw an incompletion on first down. So now it's 2nd and 10. You hand it off to your running back. The defense knows it's coming, and all of a sudden now it's 3rd and 12, and you've set yourself up for a lack of success. So I'll be interested to see what they do against Texas, like whether they're more aggressive running on first down to try to sort of get into the 2nd and 6, 2nd and 7 type of arrangements, then you can run it on second. Like I suspect they're going to have to protect Warner, and so how do they decide to do that? That'll be one of the big questions in that game. And like I think the running game is coming along. I think Jacoby Jackson's a good player. I think Jaden Ball's a good player. I think the offensive line is starting to gel. But the reality is that Florida, in the first half of the year, we talked about it. They were playing teams that had other than Tennessee, teams that were inferior to them in the games that they won, at least. And Georgia isn't in that category, and neither is Texas. And so it's going to take a yeoman's effort to come together. I thought the offensive line did an okay job blocking on the running plays. I thought they did a really bad job blocking on the quarterback running plays. And I think that showed up at a couple of specific spots. Lagway was able to make a couple of guys miss at times before he got injured. But Warner's not that kind of guy, and it caused problems later on in the game.
Before we get to the Lagway injury, Florida in the second half also in position for a field goal, botch snap. Georgia jumps on the football, missed opportunity there, and an interception late from Warner is really the killer play of the second half, down by a touchdown. Georgia easily takes that into the end zone and goes up by two scores to pull away at 34-20. So, Will, at the end of the day, Georgia comes in this game a near two touchdown favorite. They walk out with a two touchdown victory. So from that sense, on paper, looks about as expected, but it was a battle throughout. Florida keeps the game super competitive late and once again falls short in a big rivalry game for the Gators here. Overall, from what we've seen, Miami, Texas A&M, Tennessee, and now Georgia, we are seeing improvement in this team, especially considering that we're down a bunch of players, Will. Like just overall, just on that angle alone right now, have you seen what are the major differences you've seen from that Miami game to here against Georgia?
Well, so I mean, I would say that Florida's got some players, especially on defense, who are winning individual battles. That's the first thing that we can say is they weren't winning any individual battles against Miami and Texas A&M. They are actually winning some individual battles from time to time, which is allowing them to not necessarily have to blitz all the time. Um, the coverage has been much better. Not great, but it's been better. And I think they've done some things schematically, specifically in the Georgia game. I thought they did some things schematically to get to Beck because they decided they couldn't let Carson Beck sit back against a bend but don't break defense. They thought that they were going to break. And
Mhm.
so they decided to come after him. So the game plan against Georgia was very different. It's the first time I've seen Florida have a game plan specifically for an opponent. Like they decided that they were going to come after him in a way that they haven't come after other people. So I think you can see the growth from guys winning individual battles. You could certainly see the intensity against Georgia, and you've sort of seen the intensity ever since that A&M game. And then the other thing that you've seen is you've seen the ability to alter game plans, which means the players are starting to understand what they're being asked to do on the defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, we've seen DJ Lagway. We've seen a player who has the potential to be a special quarterback in the SEC and somebody who, if you put the right pieces around him, is somebody who conceivably could have a statue there someday in Gainesville. Like that's how good he is thus far. I mean, the throw to Mizell, it was like, the guy throws it downfield 40 yards more accurately than when he hands the ball off to the running back. And in fact, he's really not very accurate on the short throws. The place he needs to work is like third and four. The second turnover that they had a field goal on, like they don't have the confidence yet to have him drop back and in the red zone execute. And that honestly, that's where it's like, huh, can we get Lagway to get us inside the 20 and then bring in Mertz? Like if you had those two guys around, that might have been the rotation we should have done. But Lagway obviously is the bright spot on the offense. I think there are probably some other things when you think about Badger and DK, but really Lagway is it, right? I mean, Lagway is the guy who's sort of you're going to pin your hopes on. And then what we've seen is the special teams continues to be inconsistent. And outside and clock management is inconsistent, and being able to get up for the games early in the year. Like I get it that things have improved over the last 3 or 4 weeks, but the first 3 weeks of the season count, and you need to be ready to play those games too, and you need to be able to prepare in fall camp. And then the PR continues to be the worst in the SEC by far. You listen to the post game press conferences and cringe. Billy talked about the goal in this game was to have fanatical effort, and I'm like, that's all well and good, but the goal needs to be to win the damn game. And then he talked about, this is the first time they've come into this game when he's been the head coach here, where they showed up and they believe they could beat Georgia. And I'm like, that's a salesman issue. Like your guys should believe they can beat anybody when they go out on the field, even the first or second year you're there. I'm like, to admit that is a very interesting approach. And then he talked about a couple of weeks ago, Aiden Warner was standing around eating ice cream at practice, and now he's getting second team reps for the last 2 weeks. And I'm like, again, like maybe true, not something I'd go out and admit. So, um, there's been some good, there's been some bad. I'm not like so Billy Napier has not done anything to convince me that he's the guy who's going to lead Florida back to prominence. I understand the points that people are making. So Andy Staples had an article today. I think it was on three where he's
Yes, on
talking about
three.
where he's talking about the different options that Florida has, and a couple of those options include keeping Napier around. And I get what he's saying. Keep the money from the buyout, invest that in NIL, and sort of move forward. Like I understand the logic. I just disagree with it because of a lot of different things that we can talk about. But I'm moral victories are for year one. Moral victories are maybe for year two. By the time you've had two losing seasons and you get to this point, moral victories are out the window. It's interesting. I'm working on something right now. I'm looking at Signetti in Indiana just out of curiosity, and Indiana has averaged, like if you look at the number of seasons that they've had, the most losses that they average, not average, that's the wrong word, the frequency of losses that they've had in the season, the highest number is 7. So Indiana is almost 4-7 every time, every year, back to the Lee Corso days when he was the head coach there. Florida, the most popular or the most frequency for losses is 4, and then the next frequent is 2, And if you look overall at like the histogram, Florida has had 3 seasons overall where they've had 7 total losses. They've had 5 seasons overall where they've had more than 7 losses. So they had one year with 8 and one year with 10. Billy Napier has 2 of the 3 seasons where Florida has 7 losses. And it's entirely conceivable that he's about to have 3 of 4. And so those are the things that I think we got to start putting our heads around when we talk about what we're evaluating here is again, I'm glad the team's playing hard. I'm glad this game wasn't a complete blowout. I'm glad the game was fun until the fourth quarter, though when Lagway went down, that kind of sucked all the air out of it for a little while and made it depressing. Like all those things are great. I'm glad it was a competitive game. I'm glad it was fun to watch the football game for once until the last few minutes. But it's still a loss. And I say this about recruiting all the time. People sit there and go, "Well, it's top 10. Like that's pretty good." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's behind Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee." Like that's not acceptable in or it shouldn't be acceptable in SEC play to finish behind those 5 teams. Why is it acceptable in recruiting? And now it's just the opposite argument where it's like, you're behind all those teams. You're 2 and 3 in the conference. Um, you know, you're not competing for SEC championships. You're holding on like crazy just to make a bowl. Um, so I mean, again, it's a question of expectations, and I understand where people are coming from. I just happen to disagree with it.
Yeah, and I know, Will, you get accused at times of being overly negative on this topic here, but the part I'll point out to people is that we're a program at the University of Florida that if you want a pat on the head for being competitive with your rival, I'm not sure that's what the standard is here. If that's what we want to be, that's what we want to be. But if we want to be what Will's describing is the cold hard reality between where we stand today and where we need to be if we want to be winning this game.
So,
I would have liked to see the result of this game if DJ Lagway stays healthy. Obviously, cool. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Doesn't really matter. It happened. We are down to our third string quarterback. That's a difficult spot. There are some instances where Napier has been flat out unlucky. That's a flat out unlucky break right there, especially when you're looking like, hey, you might be able to really pull something off if Lagway stays healthy through this one. But the comparison you've used earlier in the season are relationships are built on deposits and withdrawals, and the amount of withdrawals have just been, I think, in my mind, a little too much to overcome at this point. But let me give you a scenario, Will. Let's say we saw reports earlier today. We're recording this on Wednesday night. We saw some reports that DJ Lagway is practicing. Who knows what's a smokescreen for Texas and just, let's keep Texas on edge, questioning whether or not he's going to play, preparing for him. But let's hypothetically say Lagway figures out, let's say it's not Texas, let's say he's back on the field for an LSU or an Ole Miss, right? The LSU game. So we get him for LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State, find a way to win either two of those three or even sweep that bunch. You would end the season in a really interesting spot. And this season, once again, in the Napier era, has been a roller coaster because there really was. I don't know if we've had the highest highs this season. I wouldn't say it from that stance, but there's definitely been a few moments of optimism throughout the year, especially when the season started so low. We're sitting here at 4-4, Will. We're sitting here at 4-4. If we end before the season, if you go look at our preseason magazine, what were we talking about? We're talking about 6-6 or 7-5. If we end up in that spot, did he meet expectations? Taking the emotion of where we were in week 1 or 2, and we have our opinions on it, but based on just the raw fact that if he can finish 6-6 or 7-5, did he meet expectations this season?
so I want to go back to something that you said before I answer that question. And the first one is that yes, Napier's unlucky that Lagway goes down with the injury, but Napier was also 4-3 heading into that heading into that game, right? And so this, oh, well, they could have if they'd done stuff better against Tennessee and if Lagway had stayed healthy, been 6-2. All of that's true, but Napier was part and parcel to that loss against Tennessee. And so it's not like
Yeah, he also had a healthy Lagway to play in all of Tennessee, but that's another topic for another day.
well, sure, but again, so I go back to the luck part. You make your own luck in many respects, and
Hmm.
that's, you find every edge you can and exploit it and make sure that you take advantage of those things when you're not blowing other people out. They had an opportunity to win that game in Knoxville, and Billy Napier was a net negative in terms of getting them in a position to win that game. And so I don't sit there and go, oh, well, Mertz hurt himself, and that's why Florida lost that game. Florida lost that game because they were in the red zone like 75 times in the first half and came away with 3 points. And fundamentally, that's why they lost that game. And I think you can even say the same thing for this one. The snap on the field goal was a 10-point swing because 3 plays later, Georgia was
Of
going in the end
course.
zone to
Yep.
go up 20-13.
Hmm.
And there is such a huge difference between 16 to 13. Your defense has Carson Beck seeing ghosts, that Beck has not completed a pass the entire game, and now he's behind. And so I just talked about Beck slowing down as the game went on. Well, that made it really easy for Beck to slow down because all of a sudden now he's ahead. For the first time in the game, Carson Beck has Georgia ahead, and he didn't really have to do anything to actually get him there, right? He drove him down the field for a tying touchdown. But then for 3 and out, and Florida ends up driving a little bit, gets into field goal range, and then flubs that. And again, that's on Napier. It's year three. It's a freaking field goal attempt. Your team has to be able to execute. Like if Trace Mack pushes it right of the uprights, that's not a field goal. Like that's not an attention to detail type of thing. Sometimes kickers miss.
Hmm.
But to snap it 31 yards behind the line of scrimmage is a complete execution thing. And so again, yes, it could be the special teams coach. Yes, it could be the long snapper. Yes, it could be the holder. But this happens to Napier all the time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the question is, did he meet expectations if he goes 6-6 or 7-5? Because we picked 6-6 or 7-5 in the magazine, and because that's what a lot of people at Florida. I think Vegas had him at 5.5. 5.5 wins coming in the season. Yes, he met expectations. And I would have said at the end of the year, if he was 6-6, that he needs to go. Like, like I have an article on Read and Reaction saying 9-4. Like that would put him in a position where you could say with a straight face that he's matched coaches and that he's matched some benchmarks for SEC coaches who've gone on to win SEC championships. 7-5 wasn't going to do it. 6-6
Right.
definitely wasn't going
Eight,
to do
eight
it
and four.
in terms of all those benchmarks. So I wanted to win the bowl game too, because
All right. Okay.
in order to get to a place where his winning percentage was not dead last out of all the coaches who've won an SEC championship, he needed to go 9-4. Like that was the reality. So Billy Napier needs to beat Texas, is what I'm saying. And Billy Napier needs to beat Ole Miss, and Billy Napier needs to beat LSU, and Billy Napier needs to beat Florida State, and then Billy Napier needs to win a bowl game. Like that's kind of what has to happen in order for him to meet any of the metrics that previous SEC championship coaches have met. And we can talk about rebuilding and we can talk about, well, he inherited a situation, all this sort of stuff. But I'm watching Indiana, the average season since 1973 of 4.5 and 6.9. So they've been 4-7 as an average since 1973. And Cignetti is 9-0 right now at Indiana and going to have them in the playoff. Maybe even if they lose to Ohio State in a couple of weeks. And so this idea that you can't build quickly, like the Indiana program when Cignetti took over was way more moribund than the Florida program when Billy Napier took over. The Florida average since 1960 is 8-4. It's 7.9 and 3.8. So what I'm asking for from Billy Napier is an average season at the University of Florida going back to 1960. I'm not asking him to be Steve Spurrier. I'm not asking him to be Urban Meyer. I'm not asking him to be Dan Mullen. I'm asking him to be Ron Zook. Like I'm asking him to be, Galen Hall, like or Ray Graves. Like I'm asking him to be a guy who was not a nationally prominent coach who like became a Hall of Famer at Florida. I'm asking him to be like an average Florida coach. And 6-6, 5-7, and whatever this season ends up at, if he let's say he's 6-6 again, doesn't get him there. So yeah, look, yes, I am negative in this respects because I want Florida to compete for SEC championships and national championships. I think that's a reasonable expectation for the program, and I think the track record of coaches who've had 3 years like Billy Napier has had, being able to turn it around is limited to extraordinary circumstances when you look at like guys like Frank Beamer. But even Frank Beamer had a winning season the first year he was there. You talk about like a guy like can't remember his first name, but McCarthy at Colorado was terrible for like three or
Yep.
four
Bill
years, and then
McCarthy.
turned that in Bill McCarthy, and then turned it into a national championship. Like a Bill Snyder at Kansas State taking over that program. It took him a little bit of time to get it going. But I mean, we're talking Virginia Tech back in the 80s. We're talking Kansas State, and we're talking Colorado. We're talking three programs that have nowhere near the pedigree of Florida, and in an era where you can't bring in transfers to turn things around. And I mean, you don't have to look that much further than Tallahassee. Now, look, I mean, obviously it's a complete disaster there in Tallahassee right now, but they're sort of dealing with their own Muschamp type situation, right? Where Will Muschamp in 2012 with Florida almost got to the BCS championship, and then in 2013 everything fell apart. Some of that was due to quarterback injuries, but some of that was due to the fact that Florida was going to regress to the mean because they couldn't score any points under Muschamp. And Florida State's going under that right now. But they did have a 13-1 season. Now, certainly Georgia broke them, but they did have that 13-1 season. And I mean, we haven't even had that, right? There hasn't even been like you talk about deposits and withdrawals. Like, where's the deposit? Like Tennessee last year and Utah in year one. Those are the only two like significant deposits that have been in the bank. And other than that, you're talking a loss to Miami, three losses to Georgia, two losses to LSU so far, two losses to Tennessee, and you're talking about two losses to Florida State, and you're not going to get a whole bunch of a deposit by putting Florida State at 1-11 on the last game of the year. I mean, so you know, it'll be nice to beat them because they're a rival, but, but it's also one of those where if Aiden Warner's the quarterback, I'm also not sure who I'm going to pick in that one. So, there's a lot of work to be done here for Billy Napier to save his job. I think people are looking at competitive games and saying, "Well, congratulations, here's a pat on the back for being competitive." And I'm like, "That's great if you're at Syracuse. That's great if you're at Pitt. That's great if you're at Cal. That's great if you're at Purdue, or if you're at Illinois, or if you're at Iowa, maybe. It's freaking University of Florida. Like win some games." And I don't like there are two ways to build a program or to build fan buy-in for a program. It's hope and it's wins. And the Lagway injury really sort of popped that balloon because, I was starting to hope there after that laser he threw to Mizell. That hope's still there, but the field goal botch just like completely took it out because I was like, it's the same old stuff all over again. And yeah, does Billy Napier have bad luck? Sure. But it turns out that like, it's a repeat. Like if it was just one thing, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's terrible luck. But every week, something different goes wrong. Every week, something else breaks. Every week, something else is out of sorts and doesn't work. They can't put the entire thing together for an entire 4 quarters. Even if you look at the game against Central Florida, where like the first half they looked completely dominant, and the second half it was just like, oh, we're gonna hold on. And so they didn't even put together a full game there. So I don't know, man. Again, I understand why people are making the statements they are, and it's not my money paying the buyout. It's that's real money, right? And that has to come from somewhere. But from the standpoint of is Billy Napier going to win SEC championships and national championships? Unless he goes on a 4 or 5 game winning streak here, the answer is no.
Tough spot to be in with the Lagway injury. Really thought he was obviously his legs were a significant part of the game plan early on. Uh, Man, when he went down and got carted off, Will, I thought it was the season. The fact that we're even talking about him practicing right now, Are you expecting him to see? Are you expecting to see him? It'd be a shock to see him against Texas, right? Are you expecting to see him against LSU next week?
I think we'll see him Florida State-ish.
Yeah.
You think about Asa Turner had a pretty significant hamstring injury in the opener against Miami. We haven't seen him yet. Hamstring injuries are just lingering things, and it's a question of pain tolerance and then a question of safety. I mean, he can probably limp around out there and chuck the ball downfield. Like, can he tolerate the pain and can he
It's
play?
also
Because
easy to a hamstring. If you've never pulled a hamstring before, it is very easy to pull again and again and again if you don't give it the time
yeah,
to. Very
absolutely. And
easy re-injury.
so there's a pain tolerance aspect to it. Um, there's a um, there's a question of can he throw without a base. Now, one of the things I will say about Lagway is he's not a guy who like has to step into every throw. He's got the arm strength to be able to chuck it around even if his base is off. And we've seen that repeatedly. Sometimes it's not the
Mhm.
most accurate thing in the world. He's missed a couple of throws recently. There was a third down throw on the second drive where he just sort of lofted it over. I think it was Arliss Boardingham. And he didn't have a steady base there to get the ball out. But yeah, I mean, so he will not be 100% probably for the rest of the year. The question is, what percentage does he need to be better than the guy you've got in there? And what percentage does he need to be in order to make sure that he can protect himself? Right. I mean, I don't like you're not going to see read options. You're not going to see power runs. You're not going to see that sort of stuff. I wouldn't think anytime to start with. But he's going to be better than Aiden Warner, I think, on the road against Texas if he's able to wing the ball around. Like I just got done saying Napier needs to win a bunch of games. And so, from that standpoint, there's a moral hazard here where you put a kid in who's maybe not able to protect himself and able to play because he wants to be and because he's a warrior and he wants to go out there and do it. And I think that's the thing. The guy got carted off with a hamstring injury, man. I've never seen anybody the next week come back and play. So I'm not expecting to see him play against Texas, but if he does, he's one tough SOB and probably gives Florida a better chance to win than Warner does, just in all honesty. But, again, at what cost?
Yeah, you want to take care of him, but I look at the Texas game too. That's a game that is tough enough even with a fully healthy Lagway, but the way he has the ability to go downfield, man, just to have that skill and then to see a quarterback that just doesn't have any of it come back into the game. It's tough. It's tough to lose that. We went from being on the top to going right back to where we were in terms of the deep ball, but I will give Aiden Warner some credit. Statistically, it was ugly. Visually, it was ugly at times, but to be thrown in that spot to lead the drive before halftime, to lead the drive down where we botched the field goal, and to lead the touchdown drive. Some bright moments for a third string kid from Orlando who's thrown in the game. And I get it, Will. Like, I know I read your article and heard your ice cream comment there, but you don't get a ton of reps no matter where you are as the third string quarterback. So that's a tough spot to be thrown into against the number two team in the country, and he's certainly had a few moments. That being said, we're playing another top 10 team here in the coming weeks. With a pretty stout defense, I think it's not a great spot for Aiden Warner to step into.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think so. Warner was obviously bad in the game against Georgia, but if you look at Anthony Richardson, gets his first start against Georgia back in 2021, he goes 12 of 20 for 82 yards. He had 12 rushing attempts for 26. He played the entire game. So we're not talking about much worse than that. So any criticism of Warner is really just a recognition that he's limited compared to DJ Lagway, which, duh, that's why he was the third string quarterback behind Lagway, right? He's also a redshirt freshman, so he didn't play at Yale last year. He played in high school, completed like 60% of his passes, 61% of his passes for like 7.5 yards per attempt. So, we're talking about a less accurate version of Luke Del Rio is kind of the profile from a high school perspective, which isn't terrible, especially for a third string quarterback. Like you expect that guy to be in there running scout team. You expect that guy to be in there, sort of helping out the receivers when they need extra reps to save your starter and your backup's arm during the season, right? I mean, that's sort of the role that guy usually plays. My vitriol towards the ice cream comment is not directed at Warner, nor Warner not getting the snaps. It's directed at that's a terrible PR move to get
Right,
up there
right.
and say, well, why should he be prepared? He was the third string quarterback. It's like, no, come on. Like the third string quarterback needs to be prepared. Like he needs to be getting mental reps, even if he's not getting physical reps when he's out there because of this exact scenario, right? That you're two injuries away from being the starter. And the minute that Mertz went down, the cramming that needed to be done at that point is significant, but it's also significant with Lagway, right? They had to get him ready to go too, and so having young players and all that sort of stuff, I get that aspect of it. I think the problem here isn't actually Warner, and I don't think it would be Lagway either. The problem is that Texas has the number one defense in the country against FBS opponents. They're giving up 3.7 yards per play. They also have the number one ranked defense against passing. So 4.6 yards per attempt through the air. Their PPA, so their predicted points added, which is essentially it's an EPA metric that measures the expected points added on a given play, is negative on defense. So so they're a really good defense. They're the best defense in the country, most likely.
Mm.
And therein lies one of the challenges is they're coming into this game off of a bye. They're coming into this game off of a loss, right?
No, no,
Where
no.
they,
They beat
well,
Vanderbilt
they
on the
beat
road.
Vanderbilt, but
Yeah. Georgia the
whatever.
week before it, right?
The Georgia game is still sticking in their craw.
Hey,
I
they beat
guarantee it.
Vanderbilt by 3, by the way. They almost got pavied
Yes, they almost
up in
got
Nashville.
Pavied, and so they're coming in off of a couple of what they would probably consider substandard performances. They're coming in off a bye. It's a home game, and
Hmm.
they're probably getting a third string quarterback, redshirt freshman, making his first start in the SEC. Like, and they have the number one defense in the country. Like, that's what Florida's up against in this one. And so to set expectations, I mean, if Florida doesn't get blown out in this one, it's kind of a miracle. Like, this is one where I'm like every single thing points to 45-7, right? It's like, I mean, that's kind of where this one sits in my mind. Now, look, maybe Florida will come out and surprise us. Maybe the defense will get a bunch of turnovers. Maybe Warner, after having gotten his feet wet against Georgia, will be able to show some of what allowed him to jump in front of Clay Millen there for the back or for the third string quarterback job, because Millen has had a decent year at Colorado State a couple years ago. QB rating, I think, of like 147. So average quarterback play at a an FBS level college. So to have somebody jump in front of him means that Warner's shown them some stuff in practice. Now it's a question of can that translate onto the field. But it's tough ass, man. I mean, again, it's sort of like throwing Richardson to the Wolves against Georgia, right? He had gotten his feet wet a few times earlier in the year. He'd made some big plays against, USF and some other folks, and then all of a sudden you're like, start your first start against Georgia. Like he had the one good game against LSU where he came in late and you know in the second half threw an interception and to end that one, but did have him running up and down the field, and then all of a sudden, oh, you're gonna start against Georgia, and everything sort of hit a wall. And so you're sort of in the same spot with Warner here, where Warner got a little bit of time in a couple of games earlier this year, a throw here, a throw there. Then he gets the last three quarters of this game against Georgia. Now he's making his first start against Texas. We'll see.
I thought Warner he's not the fastest quarterback, but he's not slow either. I think he can get around a little bit, so maybe somewhat effective if he could pull the ball once in a while in an RPO, but overall, I don't think he's going to command a ton of respect from the defense for his running ability. I know Napier loves his levels concepts, and we go side to side, and the Mertz style offense was not averse to the 8, 9, 10 play drives, pick your way down the field and just take what the defense gives you. But what we've seen the last few weeks from Lagway, where you're able to rip a deep ball. I think we've shown that we've got some receivers that can get open deep too. Like a guy like Mizell, for example, that's a 43-yard pass downfield for that touchdown. He had what, 2 steps on the Georgia defender?
Hmm. Yeah,
Can a
Kirby was
third
really pissed at him.
can a third string quarterback at Florida make that throw? Like can we maybe gear it to take more downfield attempts in this game rather than settling for counting on a guy to go 12 plays down the field or 8 plays down the field? Can we be a little more aggressive with some of those down the field shots, or do you foresee us sticking with the same old, stick with the running game, go side to side, play a lot of the levels type concepts?
Well, so look, I think the levels concepts didn't change when Lagway was in there. What changed was Lagway's willingness to take the shot. And his ability to hit it too, right? I mean, there were some times where Mertz took some shots, especially the ones that come to mind are the ones against Miami,
Hmm.
where he had the
Flat
guy
out
open.
missed.
He had
Yep.
Badger open a couple of times and just missed it,
Mm.
right? And what's happened is when Lagway's gotten that opportunity, he hasn't missed it. And so we sit there and go, oh wow, like he's really able to go downfield. Absolutely, he's able to go downfield, but he's hitting those throws. And so therein lies the question: does Warner have the so? I would say that when I look at Lagway and where his eyes are in those level concepts, he's starting deep to intermediate to shallow. And Warner on the interception started shallow to intermediate to deep. And
Right.
the intermediate guy was open, but he was late coming off of the shallow guy, which is what caused the interception. Um, Look, I mean that's what's going to happen with your return quarterback running his running his second
Right.
flood in that game.
Almost had another one picked off up the middle too, like where he kind of threw back in the middle of the field
Yeah,
or driver to
yeah. So,
earlier. Yeah.
but again, I think Lagway has thrown like this is the thing is Lagway is a true freshman, and Lagway has done the exact same thing a few times. Right? There have been times where Lagway's thrown very ill-advised passes. He's got 5 picks this year,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
some of those he's earned. Because he's made some bad throws into traffic, and there's probably been some other ones that should have been intercepted, or at least were in major traffic that weren't. Warner's going to do the same thing. The question I think you're asking is, so the trade off with Lagway was you were going to get the lasers that were deep that created the big plays to go along with the potential risk of the ball going the other direction from the defense. The issue that I typically had with Mertz was, yeah, he doesn't throw interceptions a ton, but it takes 12, 14, 16 plays to get all the way down the field. And the fact that like you're not going to be able to do that consistently over time, especially with as bad as Florida's defense was playing. Um, Billy Napier has to help Warner. And what that looks like, I don't specifically know. I have some ideas of what I would do. I think, if you look back at some of the game plans that Florida had back when Tim Tebow left and Urban Meyer said, I'm going to bring in Trey Burton and I'm going to have him run a ton of Wildcat to get an extra guy, to get an extra blocker. I think you could I would like to see some of that. Obviously, Trey Wilson's out because he had hip surgery either today or yesterday.
Trey Wilson out for the season, in case
Yep.
anybody
So,
hasn't heard that. Yeah.
so you've able to redshirt, so only played 4 games, but Trey Wilson's out, so you don't have that weapon back there to do that. But I think you're gonna have to find some ways to help, whether it's misdirection, whether not necessarily trick plays, but basically you're gonna have to there's always this I think instinct to sort of narrow the playbook so that the quarterback has the things he does well and you sort of zone in on those and rep them over and over and over and over again. I think it's the number one defense in the country. You probably don't have that luxury. I think you're going to have to open it up. You're going to have to trust him, and maybe the ball goes the other way. But you're going to have to give him that opportunity to open it up and take some of those shots. And look, I mean, Warner's been sitting there in meeting rooms with Lagway all year long. He's been sitting in meeting rooms with Mertz all year long, and so he's seen the contrast in the two guys. And I don't know which way he's going to go. I will say they took a deep shot on the first play he was in there. Like they took it. It wasn't effective, but they took it. And, in some ways that's going to be the story here is when they take it, when there's an opportunity to take it, are they able to take advantage? And then on the other side, I think Florida's defense is going to have to play better than they did against Georgia. Like they played pretty well against, they're going to have to be lights out against Texas. Now they are helped a little bit in that Quinn Ewers has not been good this year. Georgia's offense overall has been pretty good this year, but Arch Manning has been way better than Quinn Ewers. And so if Ewers is starting this game, you might have the same opportunity that you had with Beck. You might be able to get him off his spot. You might be able to get him to throw a couple of picks. You might be able to force some three and outs early, stay in the game, ugly it up, run the ball a bunch. But I mean, is this a Treon Harris game against Georgia a few years ago where he went 3 of 6 and Florida just said, screw it, we're going to out physical you and we're going to run it down your throat and we're going to make you stop us. And, you know, Texas is a really good team. And they have a really good defense. It's going to be really hard to
Will,
do
based on
that.
the number of three and outs I saw on Saturday, I sure hope that's not the plan. Let's take
I
a
mean, again, I just, I
lot of
don't
three and
know.
outs on Saturday.
I don't know, and neither do you. We haven't seen
Yeah.
enough film on Warner to really make a conclusion as to what he can be as a finished product. But I think if he comes out and plays like he did against Georgia, Florida's going to really struggle, and you have to help him in some capacity. Screen passes to just give him something short. And I will say, the wide receivers were terrible at blocking last week. Just terrible. Like Warner threw one out into the flat, and the wide receiver just got absolutely lit up because the other wide receiver completely missed his block. On the read option that Warner ran when it was 3rd and 2, and
Mm.
Florida was really close to field goal range, the wide receiver and tight end, I think, both missed blocks. And Warner gets hit 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Now it's 4th and 4, and Napier doesn't even have an opportunity to go for it on that particular play. So, or on the next play. So, not only does Napier need to help Warner, but the other players have to step up too. You can't whiff on blocks. You can't. You have to be more physical than Texas. You have to go out there and take the game to them. You have to own the fact that if Warner throws the ball out in the flat and it should have been a 6 yard gain, but it's a 1 yard loss because you missed a block, you've just put him in 2nd and 11 and the whole drive's basically over. And you probably need to, like, that's an area of emphasis definitely this week is you got to do your job. You got to go out there. You got to be more physical than the team you're playing against. And we'll see if they can do it.
Tough challenge out in Austin this week. Beginning of a tough month. This is the part of the schedule that everyone pointed to during the entire off season. So not a surprise at all. But I certainly was not expecting to go into it with the third string quarterback. But let's see if the defense continues to play well. Well, I do want to shout out something on the defense, though, because I do think that the defense played pretty well for stretches on Saturday. I know we gave up some big plays here and there, but they definitely had their moments. But Caleb Banks goes to tackle. I'm going to use his name one more time on this program before I go back to not using it again. But ETN gets his first carry, and we asked for a Brandon Spikes like moment on the preview episode, and Banks goes in there. First off, they dogpile him. They just absolutely swarm him and dogpile him. Several guys in on the tackle, but Banks gets in there, reaches up. He's wearing a blue mouthpiece, Florida mouthpiece, and Banks reaches up in his face mask and rips that mouthpiece out and walks back to the Florida sideline with his arm held up with the mouthpiece in his hand. I thought that was awesome by Caleb Banks, and I just became a huge Caleb Banks fan for the rest of his career at Florida. We might have to consider that one for the magazine cover next year.
I mean, it's one of those things where the reason that I like the Spikes play is because Florida won. And so, those sorts of things look a little bit petty when you lose. They look awesome when you win. And so I wish we had that
I take
picture of him
nothing
walking
away
off the
from that.
field.
I take nothing away from that. I know
Uh,
I know the result wasn't what we wanted, but right mentality. I think you went in there with the right mentality. I would have been more than willing to eat a 15-yarder to send that type of message. Absolutely loved
Yeah.
it by
I,
Caleb Banks.
I think it set a tone for the game. I think Florida on the defensive side was flying all over the place. They definitely have gotten much better at tackling in space. I think Triquez Bridges has been awesome the last couple of weeks. I think Pup Howard and Jaden Robinson have been really good. Miles Graham looked good in this game. Aaron Gates is just a beast out
Love
there.
Gates. Yeah, he's playing great.
And obviously they've lost a lot of defensive defensive backs with Marshall going down. Devin Moore, it sounds like he might be back in this one, but he was on crutches at the end of this one. You had Sharif Denson went down in this one as well. So the depth and you had, like I mentioned, Asa Turner and DJ Douglas have gone
Mm.
down earlier in the year. So you're getting really thin back there. Castell had a stinger and he left for a little while. So Florida was getting really thin on the back end. And it's reflected. Florida's like I think 90th in the country in terms of yards per play allowed on pass plays. So they're still they have righted the ship compared to how bad they were to start the year, but they still have some areas that you can exploit and some areas you can take advantage of. But what I will say is that when it comes to being physical, the team has started to get way, way more physical. Now, Texas coming off a bye week and Florida coming off a really physical game, that's going to be the question, right? Is can you do it 2 weeks in a row? And that's always the question in the SEC. Like the SEC is one of the reasons why it's difficult is especially now is because a team like Vanderbilt can come in and take you down to the wire in a way that they probably couldn't 2, 3, 4 years ago. But other than Vanderbilt, every single team in the SEC has an opportunity to come up and bite you. I mean, look at A&M last week, got bit by South Carolina, and look at Alabama, got bit by Vanderbilt. Like those sorts of things are happening in the SEC this year, probably more than others. So, can Florida come in and bite Texas? Yeah, there's a possibility they could, but it's going to require them to out physical the Longhorns. That's a really tough ask coming off a bye week. Like it just really is. Florida, for all of the talk about the difficulty of the schedule, just from a quality of team perspective, the thing that's missed in all of this is that they had to face Georgia coming off a bye, they have to face Texas coming off a bye, and they have to face Ole Miss coming off a bye. That is rough
And Florida
because
State plays Charleston Southern, but
yeah, but they're going to lose to
we don't have
Charleston
to worry.
Southern, so
We don't have to worry about Florida
we're
State. So I'll be
we're
all right.
all good. They had one completion in the first half last week, man.
I
They had
just
one completion.
baffled by how bad they are. It's the only thing. I hung out with a bunch of I got a bunch of my buddies that went to Florida State. I was hanging out with them last week, and I was saying, hey, your season's the only thing that's really getting me through this one here. So this is just fun to watch you guys tank every week too. So it's well, it's been a weird year to sit here at 4-4. It definitely doesn't. It feels like based on that level of frustration at times, it almost feels like we're sitting here worse than 4-4. But a few wins could really change the dynamic of the season. And I know a lot of people have their thoughts and opinions on where this program is and where it's going. I do too. I understand all that sentiment, but there's an opportunity ahead of this team that if they do find a way to pull a few of these games out, it's going to shift the conversation quickly so that there's plenty of football left to be played, and it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think season three of the Napier era has certainly not been without its twists and turns. The script writers for this one have been pretty creative in terms of some of the challenges they've given him. Certainly, his own personal foibles have come in and caused some issues along the way. The Tennessee game specifically, and some of the eggs that they laid early in the year. But the team has rallied around him. So all the culture stuff that I kind of made fun of and mocked early in the year, in some ways, I'm having to eat crow a little bit there because with all the noise, it would have been easy for the team to just say, screw it, to have a bunch of guys transfer out, to, a bunch of guys preserve their red shirts and basically beg out on the season. No one's done that. They have all, for the most part, they have all bought in, gotten better, and they've all gone out and given it everything that they have. Now, part of that is that if you'd watched the first 4 games of the year, I'm not sure anyone would have wanted them to transfer out given what we saw in some of those games. But at the same time, there's been improvement here. So, I think the problem that I have or the issue that I keep running into is that I want to be so one, I'd never root against my team. I will root against Florida for every game that they're playing the rest of the year. I want to see them win. And if that means that Napier stays because he's able to pull off a miracle and they get to 6-6 or 7-5, the administration decides to give him another year. I would rather that happen than them be 4-8 and make a change. Like I'm just always going to root for my team.
Hmm.
But the other part of it is that I want these players to experience that. And one of the things that really sort of stuck with me after the game against Georgia is no Georgia senior has ever lost or has ever lost to Florida. And that aspect of it is like I want the Florida players to experience that. I want the Florida players to know what it's like to win that cocktail party game. I want the Florida players to be able to experience the love that they're going to get from the fans if they're able to win that game. And that's where the criticism comes from is it's like if the head coach is preventing them from feeling that, then okay, let's look and see what kind of changes we might be able to make. But like I said, I'm never going to root against my team. I want Florida to win. I hope they win against Texas this week. I ain't picking them, but I hope that they win against Texas this week. And hey, like I'll be praying for Aiden Warner. I want him to go out there and 250 yards, a couple of touchdowns, and look like let's open the question of is it really better to have Lagway come back or do we let him sit there and let Warner get more snaps so that we got two guys for next year? Maybe you can start that conversation. At least that'd be the best case scenario, certainly.
All right. Well, the November to remember continues. Well, let's hope that we can have some positive memories here this November. We'll get one of these, I think. I think we're going to step up and get one of these, but we'll see which one it is. Uh
LSU's the one where we got shot. I said it's funny. I said that last week or 2 weeks ago. I was saying on this show that LSU was the one that was gettable, and then LSU went out and laid an egg in the second half against A&M. So it was 2 weeks ago, and they're the ones. Like they're the ones who are way more similar to Florida in all the advanced metrics than these other three. So if you were going to point to a place to bring Lagway back to get that fifth win to set you up for the sixth win against Florida State and get bowl eligible, LSU's the one. Like I would hold him out to make sure he's healthy against LSU, and that's not just because I'm taking Max down for that game and would love to see DJ Lagway play.
would you call it moral hazard?
I don't know,
A
man.
little
Put him in
moral
there.
hazard there with old
I'm all
Maxie.
good.
Yeah.
I'll be pining for him the entire week before. That's for sure.
Have a great weekend, everybody, and go Gators.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.